What started as routine late-night banter turned into television's most explosive confrontation when Dwayne Johnson faced off against Jimmy Kimmel in a heated exchange that left audiences stunned and social media erupting. The Jimmy Kimmel Live studio buzzed with its usual pre-show energy as crew members made final adjustments to the lighting and cameras. Tonight's guest was Hollywood's biggest draw, Dwayne Johnson, fresh off promoting his latest blockbuster. The audience settled into their seats, expecting the typical blend of humor and celebrity charm that had made Kimmel's show a late-night staple. Johnson emerged from backstage with his characteristic megawatt smile, waving to the enthusiastic crowd as he made his way to the guest chair. The opening minutes played out exactly as scripted. Light jokes about his workout routine, playful banter about his massive social media following, and the usual promotional beats for his upcoming projects. The audience laughed on cue, and everything seemed perfectly orchestrated for another successful episode. But beneath the surface, tension had been brewing for weeks. Industry insiders knew about the behind-the-scenes friction between Kimmel and several A-list guests who had grown tired of his increasingly aggressive interviewing style. Johnson, known for his professionalism and positive public image, had reportedly expressed concerns to his publicist about appearing on shows where hosts seemed more interested in generating viral moments than conducting respectful interviews. The first crack in the evening's facade appeared when Kimmel veered away from the agreed-upon talking points. Instead of discussing Johnson's film, the host launched into a series of pointed questions about the actor's political affiliations and his carefully maintained public persona. The questions came rapid-fire, each one more invasive than the last, designed to catch Johnson off guard and potentially create the kind of uncomfortable moment that would dominate social media feeds. Johnson's smile began to fade as he realized this wasn't the standard promotional interview he had prepared for. His responses became more measured, his body language shifting from relaxed to defensive. The audience, initially oblivious to the growing tension, started to sense something was amiss as the usual comedic timing gave way to awkward pauses and forced laughter. Kimmel, sensing he had Johnson on the defensive, doubled down on his approach. He brought up controversies that Johnson had never been directly involved in, asking loaded questions that seemed designed to trap the actor into making statements that could be taken out of context. The host's tone grew increasingly confrontational, abandoning any pretense of friendly conversation. The breaking point came when Kimmel made a snide comment about Johnson's transition from wrestling to acting, suggesting that his success was more about marketing than talent. The remark hung in the air like a challenge, and for the first time in the interview, Johnson's famous composure began to crack. His jaw tightened, and his hands gripped the armrests of his chair. The studio audience fell silent, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't the usual back and forth between host and guest. This was rapidly escalating into something much more serious. Johnson leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level, as he asked Kimmel to repeat what he had just said. Kimmel, apparently emboldened by what he perceived as a moment of television gold, not only repeated his comment but elaborated on it, suggesting that Johnson's entire career was built on a carefully crafted image rather than genuine talent. The host's smirk suggested he believed he was in control of the situation, that he could push one of Hollywood's most respected figures and emerge victorious. But Johnson's response would prove that assumption catastrophically wrong. The transformation was immediate and chilling. Johnson's entire demeanor shifted from Hollywood charm to something far more intimidating, a reminder that beneath the movie star exterior was a man who had dominated wrestling rings and commanded respect through sheer physical presence. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made everyone in the studio suddenly remember exactly who they were dealing with. "Jimmy, I'm going to give you one opportunity to walk that back," Johnson said, his words measured but loaded with unmistakable menace. The usual warmth had completely drained from his voice, replaced by something that made the temperature in the room seem to drop several degrees. Because what you just said crosses a line that you don't want to cross with me. Instead of recognizing the danger he was in, Kimmel made the fatal mistake of doubling down, perhaps driven by his own ego, or the false confidence that came from being on his own show. He leaned back in his chair with a dismissive laugh. "Oh, come on, Dwayne. We're just having a conversation here. Can't handle a little honest criticism? Maybe that's the difference between real actors and, well, whatever you want to call what you do." The audience gasped audibly. Even those unfamiliar with Johnson's background could sense the shift in atmosphere. This wasn't television anymore. This was real, and it was dangerous. Camera operators instinctively adjusted their angles, sensing they were capturing something that would be replayed countless times across every media platform. Johnson's hands slowly released their grip on the chair's armrests, and he sat back, slightly, his expression becoming unreadable. Anyone who knew him well would have recognized this as the calm before the storm, the moment when The Rock calculated his next move with the precision of a championship wrestler preparing for a finishing move. "You know what, Jimmy?" Johnson's voice had become almost conversational again, but there was something underneath it that made seasoned crew members exchange worried glances. "I've been in this business long enough to deal with all kinds of people. Promoters who tried to shortchange me, directors who thought they knew better, studio executives who wanted to put me in a box. But I've never encountered someone who mistakes their own platform for actual power." Kimmel's smirk wavered slightly, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. "Look, I'm just calling it like I see it. Your fans deserve honesty, don't they? Maybe it's time someone pointed out that the emperor has no clothes." The metaphor was poorly chosen, and Johnson seized on it immediately. "The emperor has no clothes?" He stood up slowly, his 6'5" frame casting a shadow over the host's desk. "Let me tell you something about emperors, Jimmy. They earn their crown through respect, through building something lasting. They don't tear others down from behind a desk because they're too scared to build anything themselves." The studio had fallen completely silent except for the mechanical hum of cameras that continued rolling, capturing every second of the unfolding disaster. Producers in the control room were frantically debating whether to cut to commercial, but the raw drama unfolding was unlike anything in late-night television history. Kimmel, perhaps finally realizing he had pushed too far, attempted to regain control of the situation. Hey, let's just take it down a notch here. This is getting a little intense for television, don't you think?" Johnson's laugh was devoid of any humor. "Now you want to pump the brakes? After you've spent the last 10 minutes trying to tear down everything I've worked for? After you've disrespected not just me, but everyone who's supported me throughout my career?" He took a step closer to the desk, and several security personnel positioned themselves strategically around the studio. "You made this personal, Jimmy. You wanted honest? Let me give you some honesty." What happened next would be dissected by media analysts for months. Johnson planted his hands firmly on Kimmel's desk and leaned forward, bringing himself to eye level with the increasingly uncomfortable host. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded audiences of millions, and the quiet intensity of a man who had earned everything through blood, sweat, and determination. "You sit behind this desk every night thinking you're some kind of cultural commentator, some arbiter of what's real and what's fake in Hollywood. But let me tell you what's real, Jimmy. Real is getting up at 4 in the morning for 15 years straight to train. Real is taking bumps in wrestling rings while you were making jokes about celebrities from the safety of your writer's room. Real is grinding through B-movies and direct-to-video garbage because you believe in something bigger than yourself." The audience was frozen, caught between fascination and discomfort. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was raw, unfiltered confrontation between two men with vastly different perspectives on success and respect. Camera operators continued filming, knowing they were capturing television history. Kimmel tried to interject, his voice notably smaller than before. "Dwayne, I think we're—" "No, you don't get to talk now." Johnson cut him off with surgical precision. You had your time to talk when you decided to take shots at my character and my work ethic. Now it's my turn." His voice grew louder, filling the studio with an authority that made everyone present understand exactly why he had become one of the most successful entertainers in the world. "You want to question my talent? Let me ask you something. When's the last time you created anything that didn't involve tearing someone else down?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Kimmel's face had gone pale, and his usual quick wit seemed to have completely abandoned him. The confidence that had driven him to push Johnson too far had evaporated, replaced by the dawning realization that he had picked a fight with someone completely out of his league. Johnson continued his verbal demolition with the methodical precision of a man who had learned to control his temper through years of professional discipline, but who had finally reached his breaking point. "You think because you've got a television show and a few Emmy nominations that gives you the right to judge other people's journeys? To dismiss the dreams and aspirations of millions of people who see themselves in my story?" The host attempted one last desperate grab for control. "Look, this is just good television, right? This is what people tune in for." "Good television?" Johnson's voice rose to a level that made everyone in the studio instinctively take a step back. "You think humiliating your guests and creating controversy for clicks is good television? You think using your platform to tear down people who've worked harder than you'll ever work is entertainment?" The accusation struck home because everyone in the room knew it contained more than a grain of truth. Kimmel's show had increasingly relied on gotcha moments and manufactured controversy to generate social media buzz and maintain relevance in an oversaturated late-night landscape. Johnson straightened up to his full height, towering over the desk, and the man cowering behind it. "Here's some more honesty for you, Jimmy. This entire industry knows exactly what kind of host you've become." The fake laughs, the desperate attempts to create viral moments, the way you treat your guests like props in your little comedy show. You think people don't talk? You think other celebrities don't warn each other about coming on here? The revelation sent shockwaves through the studio. This wasn't just a personal confrontation anymore. Johnson was pulling back the curtain on what had apparently become an open secret in Hollywood circles. Kimmel's voice was barely above a whisper when he finally managed to speak. "I think maybe we should—" "Maybe we should what?" Johnson demanded. "Cut to commercial? Pretend this didn't happen? Let you edit this down to make yourself look better?" He shook his head with disgust. "No, Jimmy. You wanted to play this game in front of all these people and all these cameras. Now you're going to sit there and take what you've earned." The silence that followed was deafening. Johnson stepped back from the desk, his massive frame still radiating the controlled fury that had transformed him from Hollywood's most likable star into an unstoppable force of righteous anger. The studio audience sat in stunned silence, many with their phones already out, knowing they were witnessing a moment that would define both men's careers for years to come. Kimmel made one final desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Dwayne, I'm sorry if I crossed a line. Maybe we got a little carried away here. Can we just— if you crossed a line?" Johnson's interruption was swift and merciless. "There's no if about it, Jimmy. You crossed every line there is. You disrespected me, my career, my fans, and everyone who's ever supported me. And now you want to offer some half-hearted apology because you finally realize you bit off more than you can chew?" The host's face had gone from pale to ashen. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he realized that no amount of damage control could undo what had just transpired. His writer's room tricks and practiced comebacks were useless against the raw authenticity of Johnson's fury. Johnson continued, his voice now carrying the weight of finality. "You know what the real tragedy is here? You had a platform that millions of people trusted. You could have used it to celebrate people's achievements, to inspire others, to bring some positivity into the world. Instead, you chose to tear people down for cheap laughs and social media clicks. That says everything about who you really are." The camera operators continued to roll, capturing every devastating word. In the control room, producers were frantically trying to decide whether to cut the feed, but the historical significance of what was unfolding kept them paralyzed with indecision. "Here's what's going to happen now," Johnson announced, his tone suggesting this was no longer a discussion but a declaration. "I'm going to walk out of here with my dignity intact. You're going to sit there and think about what kind of man you want to be moving forward. And everyone watching this is going to see the difference between someone who builds things up and someone who tears them down." He straightened his jacket with deliberate precision, the gesture somehow more intimidating than any physical threat could have been. "I came here tonight to promote a movie and have a good time with your audience. Instead, I ended up having to defend my character against someone who apparently doesn't understand what character means." Kimmel opened his mouth to speak, but Johnson held up a hand that commanded silence as effectively as a judge's gavel. "I'm done here," Johnson stated simply. He turned to face the audience, his expression softening slightly as he addressed them directly. "Thank you all for coming out tonight. You deserved better than this, and I'm sorry you had to witness it." The genuine warmth in his voice toward the audience stood in stark contrast to the ice-cold dismissal he had shown their host. Without another word, Johnson turned and walked toward the stage exit. Each step was measured and purposeful. A man who had said everything he needed to say and had no intention of giving his antagonist another opportunity to provoke him. The studio remained silent except for the sound of his footsteps echoing through the space. As he reached the curtain, Johnson paused and looked back one final time. "Jimmy, I hope someday you learn the difference between entertainment and humiliation. Your audience deserves hosts who lift people up, not tear them down." With that, he disappeared backstage, leaving behind a shell-shocked host and a studio full of people who knew they had just witnessed television history. Kimmel sat frozen at his desk, the weight of his public humiliation settling in as the reality of what had just occurred began to sink in. The cameras continued rolling for several more seconds before finally cutting to an unscheduled commercial break, but the damage was already done. Within minutes, clips of the confrontation would be spreading across every social media platform, sparking debates about respect, professionalism, and the responsibility that comes with having a public platform. The incident would ultimately serve as a turning point, highlighting the importance of treating guests with dignity and respect, while demonstrating that even the most patient and professional celebrities have their limits when pushed too far.